Martin, just for the sake of our audience and me, with my thimbleful of understanding about AI and finance, let's start with a very, very quick and brief definition of AI, preferably in the language you'd use to a mate who's down at the pub and is 1 pint down.
Okay, so I'm going to use a really simple definition. I think AI is the field of teaching computers to learn from data. And it's kind of a disappointing definition, right? It's really general. But I think that's appropriate because the definition of intelligence itself has to be really general. So why shouldn't the definition of AI also be equally general?
And I'm just going to bring in Paul a little bit here as well. Which bits of AI, between the two of you, perhaps, can you tell me sort of apply to financial services? Because AI is a huge umbrella term. It covers various different types of uses, like machine learning, natural language processing. What are we talking about? Which of those technologies are we talking about in terms of being useful in a finance context?
I'd say, machine learning is the key. To me, the definition of machine learning is very simple. Machines learning from data, typically. We heard a lot of talk this morning about the digital economy and this huge amount of data that's been produced every year for the last few years particularly. The interesting thing with finance is it's always had data, right? Finance has incredibly granular data, tick data from stock exchanges, et cetera, for everywhere. Forever. So I would say machine learning, applying smart technology to big data sets is something that's very innate to finance.
Perfect. And while we're on definitions and audience understanding, Martin, I think you've got a little test, right?
Yeah, I do. Can we have our first slide? Okay, great. Okay, so this, we're talking about how AI is emerging as a field. I think it's moving really, really quickly. I find it really difficult myself to gain an intuition about where we are with the state of the art. It's moving all the time. So this is hopefully going to help. So this is an article. It's on the CBI website. This is Bill Kelleher, he's IBM's chief executive. He's saying some stuff on this slide. I'm just going to blow it up. So if we go to the next slide, you can hopefully read. Oh, wow, that's good. Hopefully everyone can read that. If you can't, I can read it to you. But there are 2 paragraphs here. I'm going to give you just a couple of seconds to read it, but we're also going to just leave it there so there's no rush. So there are 2 paragraphs that Bill Kelleher is saying here, except he didn't say necessarily these paragraphs. It's possible that I generated some of this language using a neural network. So the question, if you go to the interactive session part of the app, you should see the question. So the question is, which of these paragraphs was generated by a neural network? The first, the second, both, or neither? And we're just going to leave that there so you can take your time, and then we'll announce the results at the end.
Cool. So I think you guys should be able to vote on your choice inside the app, and as Martin says, we'll come back to that in the end. Okay, so let's kind of dig into the practicality of this panel's title. Guru, I'm going to come to you. In terms of the use of AI and its variants in finance, what are we talking about practically? Are we talking? I've got this nebulous idea of banks using AI, but actually, what are we talking about here? It seems like it's much bigger than that.
It is, and if I look just at the personal journey I've been on of the last 5 years, you look at how our clients and banks, insurers, investment banks are actually embracing what AI can do. And it's really simple. So if you think about where will people unlock value, right? So that actually is the key question. So we have lots of great discussions with chief data scientists, with chief technology officers, but when you get to the C-suite, actually the question there is, where do you unlock value? So when you unlock value, actually, is it going to help me grow? Is it going to help me acquire more customers? Is it going to increase profitability? Is it going to reduce cost? Or is it going to help just understand things better? And actually, when you look at all of that, the answer is all of the above. So, traditionally, you look at cost reduction and you look at where banks or insurers are going. They cannot do that today without having AI at the heart of it. And what does that mean? That means moving on from automation to intelligent automation to actually looking at where they can remove costs through regulatory reporting using AI. It's looking at how do I understand my customers better. So we've all heard about the challenger banks. We've also all heard about the the other big banks, the traditional banks, having their own challenger banks. And you look at what they're trying to do is to say, how do I help take advantage of what I as an organization have, which is massive scale of customers, theoretically massive scale of data and brand recognition to get insights to serve my customers. And how do I help the customers understand that? So I would think of the use of AI in everything from the back office, middle office, front office, through operations, through customer service, through to risk and compliance. And there's just a whole plethora of examples in each of these, which we can talk about as time goes through.
I know Martin wants to.
And I think the other bit is actually more innovative products coming out. So we're seeing that in terms of the products being brought out. And if I think about where you could take AI, there is something about the democratization of things. So, how do we get a personal avatar on finance for people? The same way a lot of information has been democratized, how do you do that with advice, with access to products?
Bit emoji for banks, the future of AI in finance. Martin, I know you want to jump in there.
Yeah, thanks, Shona. So I'm a scientist, so I like to talk in concrete terms about things. So I'm going to give one concrete example because it helps me to think about these things. So our company, we automate back office tasks for banks. We basically read documents so that humans don't have to read the documents. And I'm just going to give you one example. So one of our customers has 4 million balance sheets that they used to have human beings read. So human beings, offshore teams, used to read 4 million balance sheets a year, extract the information, put it into some kind of database. That's really, really challenging to automate that process using traditional technologies like non-AI based in inverted commas. So we use some computer vision and some natural language processing technology in order to understand the balance sheets and extract the pieces of information and put them into the same database. So obviously it's much faster, it's much cheaper, it's more accurate. So that's a concrete example. You've got 4 million documents that you've got human beings reading every year. Now you don't need to have those people reading those 4 million documents, done by machines instead.
Walter, do you want to jump in with some examples that you've perhaps seen at Intel?
Yeah, actually that was a good example. We worked together with China UnionPay, for example, to improve the fraud detection algorithm. So the idea there was that a rule-based decision model has been always there, right? So that's not new technology at all. That was there before AI becoming a buzzword. But now with the latest generation, which is neural network and deep learning, we could improve that algorithm. And that is a new solution that was there yesterday, but just adding a new piece of intelligence on top of it. So it's not just reinventing the wheel, it's actually improving that. And it's not always and only limited to innovate something, it's also about evolving something. So in that case, with the China UnionPay, they had a big issue because the fraud detection, the fraud actually that went successfully through the system, so actually stealing money, went from 26% up to 32% in 2015. So that was a big issue considering 358 million of transaction, according to the Linux Nexus survey. So thanks to the cooperation between China UnionPay and Intel, we provided the technology in the software and hardware stack to either accelerate what they were doing before, and secondly, improve it in terms of results and accuracy.
And Paul, you do something pretty interesting that solves a completely different problem, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think it's interesting. Others might not. Although picking up on the theme from Martin, and I guess also to an extent from Walter, around back office applications. You know, I speak at quite a few AI conferences, and people get really excited about the sexy stuff, the Silicon Valley, autonomous vehicles and all those kinds of things. But actually, you know, these kinds of examples, and ours is very similar, right? I'll tell you what we do, which is every large company in the world has an unbelievably rich set of data sitting in their ERP system. Back office, accounts payable, procurement. A large FTSE 100 company will typically pay about 5 million invoices a year. It's sitting there. No one has looked at it, and that's our business. And off the back of that, by applying AI to to those sorts of databases, we can predict with a very high degree of precision, the moment an invoice comes in, we know whether that invoice is going to get settled or not. And therefore, we can facilitate a bank, any provider of capital, to underwrite the payment of millions and millions of invoices, literally instantly, rather than the months and months it would normally take to run that through an AP department in Bangalore. And that's a pretty profound, very simple. People think AI is really complicated. It's actually a very simple statistical process, but that can produce a very profound impact, both on that large corporate, and we're talking, this generates hundreds of millions of dollars in value for a corporate, let alone to the millions of small business suppliers that are trying to get paid.
This all sounds very wonderful, that you have such amazing technologies that will save everyone loads of money, time, and possibly fraudulent transactions. How convinced in reality are CEOs, CIOs of these big organizations who are being pitched with amazing technology every 5 minutes? How easy is it to convince them to buy into this stuff that is extremely complex, difficult to understand, and possibly requires some re-engineering perhaps of their back-end systems that maybe are not so interoperable?
It's hard. I mean, only because I've got the microphone that I'll hand it over. I mean, I'll tell you, I had a CFO of a FTSE 100, top 10 FTSE 100, very large organization, in our office about 3 months ago. And I did my spiel, and we'd done pretty detailed analysis on what it was going to mean for his business. And we were going to deliver £100 million of EBITDA to his business every year. Solve a huge problem. They have 50,000 SME suppliers who are getting paid, in months. It's all over the press. Theresa May's on his back. He's got this huge problem. And I said, Joe Bloggs, you've got this huge problem. I can fix all that. And I'm going to pay you £100 million a year to fix your problem. Forever. Your question, Shona, how hard is that to convince him? It's pretty hard. His answer was, that's too good to be true. How am I getting shafted? So it's hard.
Walter?
Yeah, that's definitely, I totally agree with that. And there is also another scenario that I'm personally experiencing on the field, which is people that are already convinced of the powerful and how powerful is AI, because it's somehow it's a buzzword, isn't it? But on the other side, what is obstaculating the adoption in the right way, that direction, is actually that the decision is not coming from the data understanding. It's just coming from, we want to jump on this train because we feel the needs of doing this. We're feeling somehow under pressure from what's going on in the market. And then you see two scenarios there. People that were there before the buzzword somehow, which is a niche of people that they know exactly what they want, how to achieve it, and they're probably already expert in that. And people that are trying to jump into it. And they start, in my opinion, looking from aspect like, we got funding, we got data, I want to do AI. Well, it's not that simple, isn't it? It's like having Steve Jobs and Bill Gates sitting in a room. That's the powerful of your data set. But if you don't ask them the right question, you're not going to get any high value out of it. And if you don't know what is in your data, so owning the data is definitely the first step. But if you don't know what's in your data, if you don't know how well structured, how reliable are your data, you don't really know what you can build on top of it. So that's, in my opinion, also what is obstaculating the adoption, is not just convincing of the powerful solution. Sorry. Okay. It's not just about convincing how innovative could be that path, but it's also about taking the right steps to get there.
Graham, you are someone who is sitting on stage whose company has bought into the hype. So you're Chief Digital Officer of Schroders, which has £480 billion under management, you just told me. How are Schroders using AI? How is it useful to the company, and why have you guys bought into the hype?
Well, it's really been a natural progression in fund management. It's always been a very analytical discipline, and I think that what you're seeing is the skill set. Whereas you'd have had people in the organization using Excel and Visual Basic and writing their macros, they're now reskilling, working in Python, working in R. They previously worked in MATLAB. They're now creating, some stuff in MATLAB, but also working through their own techniques and research. There's so much data now available. Paul talked about data points coming in. There is so much data now. The only way you can operate at scale really is to try and find ways of trying to process that information and look for those insights. It's a very competitive market. I think that the skill set that is needed to run this, it's not, as I think Walter said, it's great. I'm very lucky. I've got a very knowledgeable and tech-savvy CEO. But I see some of my colleagues in other companies where their CEO comes in and says, I want an AI strategy. Well, it's not that simple, as we've said. You have to make sure your data is organized, you understand what you're trying to do, and you need to be able to demonstrate evidence, because there is so much hype around this, positive and negative. It's really important to start somewhere where you really can make a difference. We use the analogy at Schroders that we're building Iron Man suits for our staff, not Terminators. We're looking at, for me, AI really stands for augmented intelligence. It's about giving people the tools to take away some of that drudgery of some of the tasks they have to do that they don't want to do anymore, but also helping them operate at scale. So that's our approach. It's more about just finding ways of augmenting what people do, which just seems to get more buy-in.
What's that practically meant for Schroders' hiring policies? For example, does it mean you're hiring infinitely more data scientists than you were before? What are the newer types of people you may be hiring? How has it changed the organization?
I think there's definitely a change in the overall mix of some of the people that we employ. We do now have a data science team. We were one of the first in the city to do that. We've been on a 5-year journey for that. And I think the things that we've learned is you need data scientists, but equally you need data engineers, and also you need people who understand the underlying infrastructure needed to run that, which is often, sort of, no disrespect, the sort of perceived to be boring bit, but that's the bit that often makes and breaks it. You need to have the processing power and the data organized.
You mentioned that you have a tech-savvy CEO. For these other less tech-savvy and kind of less AI-enthusiastic CEOs, CFOs, how can they educate themselves about this subject? And this is a question for the whole panel, perhaps.
I think there's a lot out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of publicly available resources. From the Intel side, we also have the Intel AI Academy. You just Google it. It's completely free. It's open for everybody. And they also have access not only for the training courses, classic lessons that somebody can sit down and take, but also access to dev clouds, so hardware infrastructure to play with things.
So, Shona, I'll come back to the previous question around how do you get CEOs engaged, but just on the training, the actually uptake amongst the senior execs around trying to understand this. So there's plenty of digital leadership programs. A lot of people have got the fintech route, from Silicon Valley through to London to Berlin to Tel Aviv, well traveled. So there's lots of education out there, and it is actually, when we look at it and we do executive training or board training, it's a big part of it. I think your question about, what's actually making people pay attention. So there's a cultural aspect that Graham talked about of the organization, particularly the CEO. But I think there's another aspect. And, we're sitting here in EC3 in a market that was about a stone's throw away, the Lloyd's of London market, which was formed in 1688. So you think about that market and how it survived and what it needs to do. I think there are going to be some real market pressures that are coming around, essentially the survival of the industry or some parts of the industry. Everyone's got fantastic
data. Anyone specifically?
Everyone's got fantastic data, but the reality is very few people can get access to it. So, when we can rate something better using open data, working with some of the big tech providers than insurers can, that tells you something about the data they have. I think there's a real opportunity here where if you look at the disruption coming to markets where, as an insurer, so I want to pick on some of the specialty insurers, what is their USP? Because you can't be an IT shop, you can't be a distributor, you can't be a manufacturer of, at that level all the time. So actually, are you going to specialize in understanding the risk? Are you going to specialize in understanding the clients? Are you going to specialize in getting access to capital in the most effective way? And if you're not going to do that, then get ready for some disruption coming down the line. And if I just look at conversations and things that we're doing, you have clients thinking about the potential of risk exchanges making a big impact, using massive amounts of data sets that, frankly, no single company can ever have.
Martin?
Just practically on the question of training. So there is a professional body for data science in the UK. It's the data science section of the Royal Statistical Society. and I happen to be the chair. This year, we are planning to run some short courses for C-suite executives who want to learn more about the kinds of skills that you need to assess the kind of claims that Paul has made about his technology, which, you're right, it should be a no-brainer. It should be easy to evaluate whether your technology does what it says, and yet it doesn't appear to be the case that many traditional organizations have the skills that they need to evaluate the technology appropriately. So we will be giving courses on these things. So get in touch with the data science section of the Royal Statistical Society. You can just Google it.
Have there been unhelpful developments in AI that may make C-suite more skeptical about, bringing AI into the business? I am thinking, and I don't know if there's anyone from IBM in the room, but some skepticism around IBM Watson, let's say, which, had a lot of hype. Some of that was the press's fault as well, but, IBM said Watson could do a lot of things. Actually, maybe we found out the reality isn't so good. And so you perhaps end up with CEOs kind of vaguely reading this stuff and saying, I'm not sure about this kind of woolly, magical thinking. I'm not so sure until I see something a bit more concrete. How do you tackle those unhelpful examples, that are maybe kind of making impact? Anyone can jump in.
The one thing I would say is there is an awful lot of companies that seem to be jumping, very much like blockchain a few years ago. There's a lot of companies that have sophisticated decision trees in their software that are claiming they're AI or machine learning based, and I think that doesn't help. You can often, when you meet these organizations, you get about 4 questions into how actually this is working, and you realize that their PR guy has decided that he's going to, or she is going to call it AI and machine learning.
So what are your 4 questions? How do you?
Well, that's a whole topic in itself. But I think you need to be really careful that there are so many people claiming to do AI, and the reality is, at best, most of them are just doing supervised machine learning. I think that's probably the biggest detractor at the moment, the sort of inflated claims of capability.
Would you say the majority? There's a great study a little while ago from a venture capital firm that found sort of some large number of startups with AI in their name had nothing of the kind. So if you're a reasonably well-educated, reasonably tech-savvy, but not a specialist, how are you meant to differentiate? You said that you go through this process of questioning. What else can people do? There's kind of going on training courses. How else can you really, you can learn what AI is, but still, get a lot of spiel from a tech startup CEO and still not quite know whether they're.
I think common sense. If it feels like magic, it really isn't. I think often some of the claims about, you just do this and it will learn and it will come up with this answer. Just the realms of, common sense show that how is that possible? I think that there are lots of really good systems, and I think once you realize, when you've seen systems that really do use, sophisticated machine learning, you realize the limits of what it can do, and those are quite obvious.
So, it's kind of an open secret that lots of AI companies are actually using human beings on the back end to provide the intelligence. The simple way to check there is that
we've decided not to name names.
We're not going to name any names, but let's take something like extraction of information from an invoice or a receipt. Right? There are loads of companies that do this kind of thing using computer vision, they say, or AI. So, simple check. Just look at their API. Upload an invoice, and if it takes 8 hours to get the result, then it's probably a human being. And there are loads of companies that do that.
Just to add a comment on, on the application of AI and the adoption, if we go just a little bit beyond the buzzword, what we find out is that, especially in finance, regression systems or decision trees, random forests, these kind of names, has been around for many, many years. It's no rocket science, isn't it? And it's not been invented yesterday. So I would definitely classify that as part of the statistic and the classic machine learning. And just because AI has a big hype as a buzzword, it doesn't mean that an application or a service that we are going to introduce have to be complex, right? It could be simple, as long as it works. In many financial applications like, trading and prediction, this kind of application, we need real-time responses, very close to when we got the data, and we want to be able to address that answer as soon as we can. And having a complex model beyond it might be more reliable, but might introduce delays as well. And so we have to cope with these two challenges, right? So again, if we go beyond the buzzword, especially in finance, we got already a lot of algorithms that are suitable to be applied and used today, but they're not necessarily complex. And how to simplify that, how to optimize this adoption by the CEO and the companies? Well, I would say if you're doing AI, which in my opinion is the main reason why a lot of people are jumping on that train, because they want to differentiate themselves from their competition, or they want to innovate and stay ahead of time, well, start from your business needs. AI is not a virtual market full of turnkey solutions that you can just download and plug and play. What is really the beautiful thing about AI, and we introduced this panel with this consideration, is that you get the value out of your own data. So in order to customize your own solution, start from your business need, then look at which data do you currently have available to try to target those business needs, and probably that is going to halve the first list, and then take it from there. But it doesn't have to be complex at all.
Paul, when you are presenting to prospective and current clients, what are the kind of questions you get back? What's the sort of pushback that you tend to get in terms of the questions they're asking? What do their education levels tend to be?
I think education levels on AI are typically pretty low, but I don't think that's an issue for us because we don't pitch with AI. Like, I actually think using the terms, using the buzzwords, forget it. Like, and it's kind of picking up on this point. What matters is, what does it do? What does your business need, and what does it do? And actually, if it's a human being on a calculator or working in an Excel spreadsheet, and that works great, then that's exactly what you should do. So we just don't even bother. Like that's 10 steps down the road. When they really want to do their diligence and understand what's in the black box and send 5 quants in, great. The mathematicians can go at it. So the pushback we get is the typical stuff like selling any financial product that involves data. Typical InfoSec, compliance, and I think that's right. I think that's actually where people should be focused, which is, this is our data. You're going to help us do some cool stuff with it. I want to be very, very comfortable and confident that I have control over my data. And I'm actually, we're presenting to Facebook quite soon, which I think is quite amusing. We have a tool to help you monetize your data. So it's that. It's data security, I think, would be my number one thing that we get concerns around.
Given we're talking about AI and finance, I just wanted to talk about a tension between these two things. I know you've all got thoughts on this, but finance is a highly regulated space. There's a term around artificial intelligence, which is black box algorithms, which is that it is hard to understand exactly what is going on in the background and how decisions are being made by the algorithm. How do we resolve that tension of something that needs to be relatively transparent and is highly regulated, and this technology where we're still talking about governance and regulation, as the prior panel were talking about, and it's not super clear how the computer makes the decision?
I don't think it is hard to understand how an AI system is working compared to a human-based system, which is the alternative, right? The alternative that we're looking at is an incredibly complex human-based social system. It's normally decisions are not made by a single person in a large organization. They're made by multiple tiers of organizations, internal and external. And machines have they have a great advantage because you know what data went in. You can replay the decision. You can tweak the data, see if the decision changes. And you have this whole auditability question. There are loads of aspects of machine intelligence which are very transparent, far more transparent than humans, for instance. 2008 financial crisis, trying to pin, this widely accepted in society that there were some ethical breakdowns, but it's not so clear whose fault it was or who made the bad decision and what was the problem. How many people from Wall Street went to prison because of 2008? I think some people say it's between 0 and 1 person. So it's really not that easy to know in a human-based system why the decision is bad.
Guru, is this something you hear brought up by clients, sort of worries about the regulation of AI as a tech versus their own businesses?
So it definitely is a board item, right? So if you think about the ethics and governance of AI, it's a board item. I'm going to try and avoid repeating the session you just went through previously around it, but just a few thoughts. There is very much a a focus around what it is. And actually that's going to be driven by understanding, trying to understand what is happening. You know, because if you've got the wrong type of data, and we can all discuss what wrong means, using AI will get you bad results quicker, right? So that's one of the things you got to think about. It's definitely a consideration. I think with everything, you know, it's what is the balance between really trying to embrace something that's new, embrace something that's new, that's possible because of today's, you know, developments in cloud technology, in data, in algorithms, in talent. But actually what it is the balance between how do you meet your business need and scale it, and how do you make sure that you understand what's happening. Otherwise, you know, you could end up in a difficult situation, either through, you know, impact on society, but all financial, you know, fines.
Quick fire final question. I'm going to start with Walter and then come this way, which is which jobs in finance will AI eliminate and which jobs may it create? You can come up with one or several examples, but I want quick fire.
Are we sure it's going to eliminate jobs?
Which jobs in particular may it eliminate?
I would argue, are we sure it's going to eliminate any job?
Yeah, I agree, none.
All very optimistic.
I think it will change.
Sorry, the point is, it'll enable you to automate very basic mundane tasks so that the human beings can
So
move
tax
to
accountants
higher
have nothing
value.
to worry about.
I think you'll see a significant shift in skill set. I think already my 12-year-old is learning how to program in Python. He's learning about machine learning. So I think that, you know, I don't know if it will eliminate jobs, but it will certainly change the skill set.
I think we're in an age of humans with machines. So I actually think my personal view is the mundane stuff that people really hate doing. I started off training as an actuary, and I can tell you entering data is not fun. I quickly learned how to code and made my life a lot easier, and I just think some of the mundane stuff will disappear or be automated to enable you to do the things that you really want to do, and hopefully have some free time to enjoy life, right? Because that's what it's about too.
I think it's going to be repetitive tasks involving documents, tasks which don't require very advanced cognitive capabilities. And we kind of know what those tasks are already because they've already been offshored. And I think those are going to be the tasks that are automated first.
So AI will make life more creative and less boring. What an optimistic panel we are. I don't know how to see the results of this particular poll, which was the difference between these two sentences being pointed
Should we do a
out.
show of hands instead?
Yeah, maybe a show of hands. So people mostly thought the second sentence was generated by an AI. Martin, do you want to tell us?
It was both.
Both. Well, I feel like we've all learned something from that. Thank you so much to the panel for your thoughts on AI and finance and for this fun audience exercise. Thank you very much.